The printer costs $40. The ink to run it costs $80. This is not an accident. It's a business model with a name, the razor and blades model. Sell the device cheaply, then charge a premium for the consumable it requires to function. Repeat indefinitely. The Gillette Razor Company popularized this approach in the early 20th century. King Gillette sold handles at a loss and made his fortune on replacement blades. The printer industry looked at that playbook and kept it. Printer companies frequently sell hardware at or below the cost of manufacturing it. On paper, that looks like generosity. In practice, it's an investment, one the company expects to recover with interest every time you buy a cartridge. Consumer Reports analyzed the cost of printer ink and found it can reach $75 per ounce, placing it among the most expensive liquids a household regularly purchases. The cartridge is small, the price is not. Follow the incentive. A printer manufacturer that sells hardware cheaply must recover its costs somewhere. Ink is that somewhere. The model doesn't work unless the consumable stays expensive and the customer keeps buying it. But here's where it gets harder to dismiss as market forces. Printer manufacturers have added microchips to their ink cartridges. These chips communicate with the printer, and the printer uses that communication to decide whether the cartridge is acceptable. The chip's job is not to improve print quality. Its job is to verify that the cartridge came from the original manufacturer. A third-party cartridge, even one filled with functional ink, can be rejected outright. The printer simply refuses to print. Some printers are programmed to reject refilled cartridges, even when those cartridges are completely full of ink. Not empty, full. The printer's objection isn't about ink level, it's about origin. Technically, a quality control measure. In practice, a revenue protection mechanism. Meanwhile, the field of competing manufacturers has narrowed. HP acquired Samsung's entire printer division in 2017. Xerox attempted a hostile takeover of HP just 2 years later. Fewer companies means fewer alternatives, which means less pressure to lower ink prices. Market competition is the mechanism that drives prices down. When consolidation reduces that competition, the mechanism weakens. IDC, the technology research firm, has tracked the consumer printer market as dominated by just 4 manufacturers controlling over 80% of global unit sales, a structure that eliminates the incentive to compete on ink price. Here's a misconception worth correcting. Many consumers assume that more expensive printer ink means better print quality. It doesn't. Price reflects the manufacturer's market position, not the chemical sophistication of the ink formula inside the cartridge. The related claim that third-party ink will always damage your printer isn't supported by evidence. Reputable third-party suppliers produce ink formulated to manufacturer specifications. The risk is real if the supplier is unreliable. It's not an inherent property of non-OEM ink. The Gillette model, as originally designed, relied on a simple physical dependency. You needed Gillette blades for a Gillette handle. The printer industry took that dependency and encoded it into software, making it harder to route around. Which raises a question the model itself doesn't answer. Is this legal? Broadly, yes. In Lexmark International v. Static Control Components, a case that reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 2014, the courts declined to use intellectual property law to shut down third-party cartridge makers. But chip-based authentication was never ruled unlawful. The chip is an engineering decision made in service of a financial objective. Run the numbers over a printer's typical lifespan. The hardware might cost $40. The ink purchased over 3 to 5 years of regular use can cost several hundred. The printer isn't the product. The printer is the commitment device that makes you a recurring ink customer. The industry's framing of this arrangement is, one must admit, elegant. The cheap printer is presented as a consumer benefit. Accessible technology, affordable hardware. The ongoing ink cost is a separate line item, purchased separately over time, in amounts too small to trigger immediate alarm. The model has since evolved. Several manufacturers now offer ink subscription services where a monthly fee covers a set number of printed pages. The hardware cost drops further. The ink dependency becomes a literal contract. The razor and blades model, formalized in writing. Cancel the subscription, and some printers stop printing entirely, even if ink physically remains in the cartridge. The ink you paid for in the device you own becomes inaccessible. Technically, a service interruption. In practice, a locked cabinet. Consumer Reports documented this cost structure in a systematic ink cost analysis comparing price per page across printer brands. Their findings showed that some printers cost as little as 3 cents per page with third-party ink, but over 25 cents per page with OEM cartridges, a difference that compounds into hundreds of dollars over a printer's life. The consumer's most effective countermeasure is third-party ink cartridges sourced from reputable suppliers. These can cut per-page printing costs substantially. The chip barrier remains, but some third-party manufacturers produce cartridges with compatible chips designed to pass the printer's authentication check. This has produced a quiet, ongoing technical arms race. Manufacturers issue firmware updates that invalidate third-party chips. Third-party suppliers reverse engineer the new authentication protocols and release updated chips. The cycle repeats. The consumer sits in the middle, occasionally caught by a firmware update they never requested. Follow the incentive again. Every page printed with third-party ink generates no revenue for the original manufacturer. The firmware update isn't a security patch. It's a revenue protection measure dressed in the language of quality assurance. The razor and blades model isn't unique to printers. Coffee machines and proprietary pods, gaming consoles and licensed cartridges, electric toothbrushes and replacement heads. The printer is the most transparent example because the cost gap between device and consumable is so stark. What this tells us about hardware purchases generally: the sticker price is not the price. The sticker price is the entry fee. The actual cost is the sum of every consumable, subscription, or proprietary accessory the device will require over its functional life. A $40 printer that requires proprietary cartridges at $30 each, replaced 4 times a year, costs $160 annually in ink alone. A $120 printer compatible with third-party ink at $8 per cartridge costs considerably less over the same period. There is, however, a countervailing force gaining ground. The right to repair movement has won legislative victories in several U.S. states, with Minnesota passing a right to repair law in 2023. Advocates have specifically cited printer firmware updates as a test case for whether manufacturers can legally degrade a product you already own. That $40 printer on the shelf isn't a bargain. It's an opening bid. The manufacturer has calculated that the customer who picks it up will spend multiples of that price on ink over the device's lifetime. The price tag is an invitation, not a transaction. HP's own annual reports confirm the scale of this dependency. In fiscal year 2022, HP's supplies segment, primarily ink and toner, generated roughly 65% of the company's total printing division profit, despite representing a fraction of unit volume. The hardware exists to sell the ink. The numbers say so directly. The Electronic Frontier Foundation flagged the firmware update practice in a formal 2016 complaint, arguing that manufacturers were remotely altering devices consumers legally owned to block products they were legally permitted to use. The debate is ongoing. The printers, meanwhile, continue updating. The actionable takeaway is straightforward. Before purchasing any printer, look up the cost of its replacement cartridges. Check whether third-party compatible cartridges exist for that model. Check the manufacturer's history of firmware updates targeting third-party ink. Then decide what you're actually buying. King Gillette built his fortune selling handles at a loss. A century later, the printer sits on your desk, performing the same function he designed for a razor. The handle changed, the model did not. The incentive, as always, remained perfectly intact. This audit is complete. The findings, as always, may be ignored.